Hi. All right, so day two. This everyday thing is already getting to be a little bit of a problem. Probably shouldn't have started it the day before my son's birthday and heavy work day. But here we are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about starting a musical. Obviously I've been working on this show, Rockstar Widow, for a couple years now. I'd have to do the math, more than a couple of years. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about how it started and how I approached it, and go from there. So even though I'm not starting it fresh, part of the process with this is really starting um, to look at how we got to where we are and where we're going from there. So it started with I got a call from a friend who had a friend of hers who had written a nonfiction book, a book on grief called New Way to Grieve, and thought it would be a good basis for a musical. Now, a lot of nonfiction doesn't necessarily fit for musicals. It's kind of a stretch sometimes, but this was based heavily on her journey and experience dealing with grief, and so we had both the book and the stories and anecdotes from the book, but also from her actual life. When we first started, mostly I was just advising. They had she had someone else who was helping her with it. She had a lot of ideas. Sort of talked them through how you get started working on a musical. What do you need to look at? What do you need to decide? How do you do that? How do you format it? How do you get started? Who else do you need on the team? All that kind of stuff. And um, give them a couple of meetings where I just consulted on it, and they were doing some work, some thinking, some discussing, brainstorming on their own. And it was a decent idea. I definitely thought it had potential. Um, and at the end of kind of a meeting conversation, Paulette, the author of the nonfiction book, whose life it's inspired by, said, "Well, what would it take for you to do a pass at this?" To basically do a first draft of the story or book of the musical. So we decided on a fee and a timeline, because it's really important, um, when you're doing the first pass of a musical. It's important to have enough time to really flesh it out and think from a story standpoint. But it's too much time, is also has also pitfalls. The biggest thing for me about starting a musical, even when you've got a source material, is you have to make some decisions about the drama and structure of it, really going through and figuring out the action. A lot of musicals get started by somebody who's doing one or even two elements of it, and then they expect to kind of get it finished and stick somebody in later. All the time I see posts or I talk to people that, oh, I've done the book and the lyrics. Now I just need a composer. And it's like, okay, yeah, it doesn't necessarily work that way. That's not necessarily the best recommended approach. Um, the other's true. I've seen a lot of shows where, the songwriters get together and they write a bunch of songs and they think, oh, well, the story will just emerge out of that to support that. And that doesn't happen very often. It usually takes a huge amount of work. And even in jukebox musicals where you're dealing with pre-existing songs, there's still just a ton of crafting to get that to work. And I think that a lot of times it's easier to just do the work to get the team together and to have an initial idea of everything beforehand. There's the whole Stephen King thing between plotters and pantsers, people that are plotting out an entire thing versus people that are flying by the seat of their pants. And um, I think that the key thing for me, it's not necessarily that you have to have the whole thing plotted, But I do think you have to have some real strong idea about how you're going to tell the story and where the conflict is. One of the things, even with Stephen King, uh, writing as a pantser, he has already developed such a strong sense of what's compelling in his writing and where the conflict is. Like he developed early on this ability to bring out the conflict, and so then inside of the world of his writing style, he can pull it off. I think that's really hard when you have multiple writers, when you have a collaborative team, and it's really hard when you're dealing with things that take as many different elements as music and lyrics and book. I just think that that's a heavy lift, and maybe there are some savants, some people that can just sit down and do it. I know some people that can do songs that way, and it's pretty amazing. It's not necessarily how um, I work or most of the professionals that I know work, but it's um, there's a happy medium between, oh, I've really thought everything out such that it doesn't have any life left to it, versus no, I'm just making it up as I go. Now, depending on what the show is and where it's going to go and what your resources are, sometimes making it up as you go can be a lot of fun as a show. So it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that, you've got to kind of know what you're going for, I think. Since we were adapting a nonfiction book, I knew I wanted a fairly traditional structure. I knew I didn't want a huge show because there was nothing attached to it that would kind of justify a $30 million musical versus a 15 or $16 million musical, or a big Broadway show that, something that you're going to tour and fill 2,300 seat houses versus something that, might uh, be best in the 350 range, or even up to 600, but something that's got a little more modest resources, and the number of characters involved and the number of set pieces that just kind of jumped out at me from the book. I wanted to keep the resources under control a bit. So the first thing was to read it a couple times, and I did. I read it. I made notes. I wrote in the margins and underlined stuff, and had the Kindle version. So I was also um, able to copy pieces out. Had a couple of conversations more with Paulette, and really, that really then kind of started to spin a draft. Um, when I'm writing book and lyrics, and especially if I'm writing book music and lyrics or part of any of the three, I will try and um, do placeholder lyrics, dummy lyrics for most of it, just to kind of get an initial sense. Sometimes even get a good title, knowing that I'm really going to come back and dig into that with either with another composer or another lyricist, or just for myself when there's time. For this, it was really I wasn't planning at the time to do music and lyrics, so I really needed to do the book in such a way so that um, a composer lyricist team could take it and run with it, if that was what happened. To do that, I kind of took a page, out of Peter Stone's book, and some other book writers of musicals, and even James Lapine, and did a kind of combination of placeholder lyrics. And there were places where I wrote a monologue to accomplish what I thought needed to happen dramatically at each point, and had some fun with that. And I think one or two of them are still in the show, in various things, but we'll come to those. But really, this aspect of breaking it out, getting to know the characters, and then going from there, getting to know the characters, and then looking from, okay, where's the conflict? Now, this was a kind of challenging, kind of still is challenging from a conflict standpoint, because um, when you're dealing with something, a theme like grief, and, how do you have your life, live your life, be alive, have purpose, and make a difference in the world, despite crushing grief, there's a natural pull towards um, a lack of conflict. There's a natural pull towards a lot of internal stuff. And you can kind of goose internal stuff to give the illusion of conflict. And that's one of the, I think that's one of the dangers of musicals. And I see it, a lot of the musicals I see, I'm like, that really would have been more poignant with somebody else on stage. Whether they were just listening, or whether it was a scene with an action and a back and forth. I think that's one of the challenging things with musicals, and I think it's exacerbated a little bit by people coming from the singer-songwriter or popular music world. Um, Things that work really, really well on a radio single or an album don't always work well on a stage. And that's both with the details of the craft, like how the words fall together. They're things um, that on a PA system in a theater will not communicate, but communicate really, really effectively on an album. But then it's also in the dramatic structure of the moment. That many of the best moments in theater have a real conflict in the song. It's not a song about the conflict or a song about people's experience. There's an actual conflict. I mean, even something like Something's Coming from West Side Story, there's a conflict there happening. And we don't, everybody talks about, oh, it's an I want song or an I am song. But the whole point is that there's a conflict between what he wants and where he is. And so that's clearer in an I want song than it is in a lot of other songs. But, it's how do you have that? How do you have that dramatic aspect to it, which is part of what makes it theater versus a concert or an album? Um, so the first step was to really get to know the book, and I'm going to break that down a little bit in the next couple of videos. But I do also in the next video I want to talk some more about where we ended up with the music, and some things about that, and I'll give some examples. This isn't going to be like 100 days of me talking. Hopefully. No, but I'll definitely I'll sing some, and I'll share some other people singing. My I love Sondheim's comment about his singing, which isn't totally true with my singing, but I kind of like to start from there, which is you get to hear me sing it an octave too low and out of tune. um, and I think that that's a good place to start for all composers, is octave too low and out of tune, especially with a show with a strong female lead. It's just out of my range. Um, so that's, kind of the initial, like, how we got started with it. A spoiler alert is that obviously after I finished the first draft, we then started talking about me continuing to work on it, because I kind of fell in love with the characters and what we were doing already. But that's a spoiler. More to come. Thanks for watching.